have that one yet. Okay, so I happen to know who wrote that one, that's why I said that. So what do you notice when we put them in a line? Is there one singular definition of reflection that we've established here?
No.
No, right? We're all over the place. So we've got everything from metacognition and in-depth thinking to relating it to assessment, to relating it to looking back versus progressive and traditional, identifying strengths and weaknesses, meaningful thoughtfulness. Some of you have it as critical, some of you don't. So the point here is that reflection is understood in many different ways and from many different angles. So when we use the word, it's really important to articulate why we're using it, how we're using it, and for what purpose. So to tell you a quick story, I just finished my dissertation fieldwork this past winter. I was working with thank you. I was working with grades 6, 7, and 8 students, so 11 to 13, 11 to 14 or so, and reflection was a huge part of our project. And I was just sort of bandying the word about in the first couple of days that we were together, and finally I had a student. I was getting a lot of eye rolling, which is not that strange from 13-year-olds, but I was sort of curious as to why it was happening, so I was talking to some students and they said, reflection is what we have to do when we get in trouble. So this feels like we're in trouble, like we have to reflect back on our actions and how we would do differently next time. So that's sort of what we're all waiting for here. Not something I would have ever thought of. So before we use the word reflection, I think it's super important to really think about how we're using it. So oftentimes we have these 4 words that are sort of used interchangeably but are not necessarily interchangeable. So the concept of reflection, the concept of reflective practice, the concept of reflexivity, and the concept of critical reflection. I'm going to go through one set of definitions of these. There are multiple ways of thinking about these, but for our purposes today, we're going to use Jan Fuchs' definition, which is a fun name to say. Jan Fuchs is a social worker and has spent a lot of time thinking about what reflection is and what it can be. So given these definitions, reflection itself is just a broad definition of saying a way of approaching one's life and actions. So we can live a reflective and examined life, if you will. Reflective practice is when it becomes more action-oriented. So we're reducing the gap between theory and practice. So how does what I actually just did align with what I said I was going to do? How does what I learn in the classroom transfer or not to the doing of my practice? So how do I take this thing that I've learned and how do I put it into practice? Reflexivity, for our purposes, is recognizing that all aspects of ourselves and our context impact what we do, feel, and say. So I am saying what I am saying, or I am sharing what I am sharing, or I am feeling or acting in the way that I am because of what has happened to me in my past, because of the experiences that I have had, because of the relationships that I have had, because of the thinking that I have done. So who I am in the world is a result of experiences that have occurred. Critical reflection, which is what we're going to focus the most on, is not only what and how I did the thing, but why I did the thing. And what does why I did it say about my assumptions and my taken for granted norms, and how might I change? So this goes back to the action-oriented. We had a couple up there that were action-oriented. What is a taken for granted norm? What do I mean when I say that? Yeah, remind me of your name also.
Sean.
Sean.
Bias.
Bias? What do you mean by bias?
Like sometimes you take for granted your own personal, what's normal to you, but without considering other viewpoints.
Exactly, so thinking that everything is sort of singular rather than plural and multiple that's happening around us. So taking a moment to step back and think about our assumptions and our taken for granted norms and how those impact the way that we engage with others. So we're going to focus tonight on, at least in the hour that we're together, on critical reflection as we might apply it to reflective practice. So how does this idea of taken for granted norms and assumptions and the whys of what we do, how does that impact the connection to our practice and what we do as educators and what our students are doing as students? So why does or should practices of critical reflection then matter? Why should they matter for you personally as pedagogues? Why should they matter as a way of learning from and with students? And why should they matter for the benefit of your students themselves? So why are we hoping to foster a practice of critical reflection in the students with whom we work? Take a moment, talk to the people you just did the post-it note activity with, and think through some of these ideas real quick. Arrington.
In our group, we kind of went through all three, so
Okay.
like quicker. But we talked a lot about how critical reflection sort of like creates a space for the learner and the educator to sort of reflect upon each other and sort of like reverse the roles of educator and learner. As like an educator, you're getting the reflection from the learner, and as a learner, you could be getting it from the educator and like teaching to that. And then we talked about how it provides sort of a different way of learning outside of the traditional classroom mold for students to be able to approach things differently and to approach like the content differently. And then that also, it's something that's really transformative outside of the classroom. Like it's really effective and useful in who they are as people, and as we're talking like as democratic citizens. Like it provides them sort of like a tool that's effective beyond the classroom.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you meant as far as non-traditional? So how are you understanding it as helping? Just talk more about that.
Yeah,
that idea.
I think that it sort of it doesn't work with a sort of like model of I hold the information and I'm going to give it to the student. It doesn't work with that, because this like requires the students to critically reflect upon the content and the curriculum, how it's being taught to them, the way it's being taught, and where was it rooted, and who's it coming from, and like all of those questions. It requires them to ask them and to think about them, and that then suddenly the educator doesn't hold the power and they don't hold the knowledge in that situation.
So many fantastic points there. So the learner-educator mutual relationship, examining the power relations that are inherent there, inquiry-based processes, so thinking about inquiry as a way of doing, as a way of being both in the classroom as well as outside, and valuing student knowledge, valuing the funds of knowledge that students bring into the classroom. Thank you so much. Other thoughts? I had lots of great conversations. Yeah, remind me of your name.
Jasmine.
Jasmine.
I was thinking that when a student has to do critical thinking and they have to reflect on why am I doing this, or how did I do this, then it helps them be able to understand why other people are doing things as well. So like as a way of, if I understand that I have motivations for the reasons why I do things, then I can also understand that others have motivations for the reasons why they do things.
That wasn't meant to stop you from
No,
talking. I was
but
just agreeing.
but just like as a way to, if you are being self-reflective, it allows you to open up to the idea that other people have the same type or like the same or different thoughts of why they're doing things as well.
So knowing the other, right? Understanding that there are multiple perspectives that are coming in. Perhaps we all go through the same processes. We all have different positionalities that are informed by ways of doing and being, and that impacts all of us and the reasons why we do what we do. Other thoughts? Yeah, Sean.
I think it's important to model.
Talk more about that.
So, learning in and of itself is a critically reflective thing. So
Okay.
if you're teaching any subject, one of the core principles you're supposed to be teaching is how to learn.
Okay.
So then modeling that and having dialogue, explicit dialogue with your students, and like talking through their processes and your processes helps them to sort of connect with that more, like I think Arrington was saying, a more transferable skill, right? That they can bring outside of the subject.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things that I often say is part of that is frustration. Like when students get really frustrated, I get really excited about that. I'm like, yes,
Yes.
that means that you're reflecting.
Yes.
That you need to now do something different. And then when I get frustrated, then I will express the same thing with them, right? And
Right.
so I'm learning this, or I tried this and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So then we can all kind of mutually work through it together. It's more of a togetherness as opposed to, like Arrington brought up again, the traditional model of teacher delivered
Yeah.
content. It's the sharing of all of that.
Yeah, ambiguity and dissonance are when we learn. And so the idea that we are embracing that and that's a part of what we're doing in the classroom is certainly part of critical reflection.